Hi, welcome to the YouTube channel Witness for Jesus. This is Dawn. I've interviewed a lady called Lesley who used to be a Jehovah's Witness. Please listen to the interview through because there's some shocking information comes out during our discussion. She talks about experiencing domestic abuse within the witnesses and what happened there, about child abuse. We both talk about that and about the things we know about the child abuse situation in our local area. She talks about lots of things that happened when she was in the witnesses, and she talks about shunning and the things that she's experienced as well. So please listen and enjoy and let us know what you think. I'm sure Lesley would be interested to see people's comments. Thanks. Welcome to the channel Witness for Jesus. This is Dawn. I'm here doing an interview with a former Jehovah's Witness called Lesley, who wants to share her story with us. And she's got quite a story to tell, definitely. She's got a lot to say about the Jehovah's Witnesses. So I'm really glad to be able to speak to her. So, hi Lesley.
Hello.
So, I'm going to ask you about your experience of Jehovah's Witnesses and, how did it all start? Just let's go to the beginning and go through that way, I think.
Yeah, well, it started the typical way that the witnesses start, with knocking on the door. I didn't accept the Bible study at first. I did pay them for the magazines, but anyway, they came back, and then they came back, and then I did accept a Bible study. I think the kicker for me, the starter for me, was the You Can Live Forever book. I think that's what persuaded me that I needed to have this Bible study, because I was already asking questions, and I had a vicar around at the house, and he had no clue how to answer me. So this seemed like an answer from God, really, because I was asking and I was looking.
So how old were you at that point?
Well, I was a bit older than most when they start. I was 33, 34.
Right. So what about your background from being a child? Did you have a religious background?
Not really. It's the usual. My father was Church of England. We were in Bangor, North Wales. My mother was chapel. So I never went to chapel. But obviously Sunday school and the evening worship, I went twice on a Sunday with my father until I got old enough to think, no, I didn't want to go anymore.
Did you have a belief in God?
I knew there was something, because I can remember as a child when I was 7 or 8 being really, really happy because one day I was going to be back with my father, Jesus, again. Sorry. Yeah.
So what was it that in your heart, before that Jehovah's Witness knocked on your door, what do you think it was that you were looking for?
Well, it had been such a turbulent life, a violent life, a traumatic life. So I wasn't coping, and I didn't realise at the time that I was post-trauma. I just knew I was a mess. And I kept saying, there must be something more than this. I can't carry on like this, so I'm just not going to survive. So really, the desire to know more, to give me a reason to carry on and to get some answers, was the way that I was thinking. That's the way I was going.
So you found the Live Forever book and the stuff that said. So what was it? What stood out about the Jehovah's Witnesses that you thought was good?
It was different, and I've never felt like I belonged anywhere. I was a square peg in a round hole, being adopted and all the abuse. And then all of a sudden, these people, they came round with this hope for everlasting life and a better life. And then, of course, they love bomb you. I'd never had so much love and attention in my life. That's really what swung it for me. That feeling that I belonged somewhere at last, that was the clincher for me.
So how did people in your life react to you getting involved with the witnesses?
there was hardly any reaction because I didn't really know many people. This is an estate I'd only lived on for about 2 years at that time. I only had one friend I'd met at nursery. She was a Catholic and she wasn't the least bit bothered. In fact, 6 months after I started studying, she started studying. So we came in together, really, and both our daughters were brought up together. So, yeah, that was it. Yeah.
So, did you already have your daughter when you became a Jehovah's Witness?
Yes, she was. I had her when I was nearly 33. So, yeah, I'd been studying. She was too young then. She was born in 86. So she was too young to know what it was all about. So it just looked like it might be a better life for her as well, instead of the kind of life that I'd had to live. I didn't want her to have that.
So when you became a Jehovah's Witness, did you get baptised quite quickly? Or?
No, it took me 5 years.
5 years?
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on in that time, in that 5 years. That was very negative, that I won't go into, but it was very traumatic. But it was actually the witnesses that got me through. So that just compounded it for me, that I needed to stay.
So you got baptised. So do you know how old you was when you got baptised?
Yeah, nearly 40, 39. Yeah. My daughter was, I think she was nearly 8 at that time.
So tell me what happened next.
Well, I was baptised and I met a brother. Oh boy. Yeah, I met a brother who was newly baptised. We started courting, the usual ritual that the witnesses do. He was charm itself. Paid for everything, bought me flowers, did house DIY at the house. It went quite smoothly. No hint of the trouble to come, which it did. But then, that's, yeah. It was downhill from there on.
Oh dear. So, tell me more about, that experience, because...
Well, it started off really before we got married, because he was sacked from his job for being rude to somebody at work, one of the bosses, so that wasn't a good... that was a precursor. Then about 5 months after the marriage, the control started, the name-calling started. When he married me, I had a lovely home. I'd spent years doing it up, spent a lot of money, but he insisted that we moved off this estate where I was, and it was just horrendous. It just went downhill from there. I mean, we moved into a dump in a nicer area, but it was a dump, and I helped him set up his own window cleaning business, like window cleaning, surprise, surprise. And it was very successful. But he wouldn't give me any money. He wouldn't support us, wouldn't pay the bills, wouldn't give us money for food. The control was complete. I ended up going back to work, working nights in care homes. Wouldn't pay his tax. I ended up paying his going extra nights to pay his tax. And with all that was the name calling, the threats, him disappearing for nights at a time, not paying the mortgage. Yeah, it was very, very stressful. Very stressful.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds awful.
Well, I was under the illusion with being a witness and having Jehovah, I was confident I could make it work. I thought, well, we've got the Bible, we've got Jehovah, we can make it work if we try hard enough. And that was a big mistake, big mistake.
What was his standing in the congregation? Like, he's baptised, but
Yeah.
do you know, did people think he were all right in the
Oh,
congregation?
yeah, they didn't believe me when I told them how aggressive he was, especially the people that brought him into this religion. I told them that what he was doing, and you know, he'd broken my wrist at one point, and I told them what he was doing, that he wasn't supporting us, and they didn't believe me. They said, "Oh no, we know him. You know, he's not like that." So that was the general consensus, because he had this front. You know, he's wonderful in front of people, but we could be arguing right up until the moment we got to the Kingdom Hall doors. And then in the hall, he'd sit down and put his arm round us and be happy families. And then the row would continue when we left. It was an absolute nightmare.
So, did you go to the elders about it?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I was told I had to try harder. The usual story, you know. Don't argue with him. Just pour in more prayer. Go on to the ministry more, which I did do. I auxiliary pioneered, thinking it would strengthen me up, you know, make me stronger to cope with all the aggression and the control. I thought it would make, and it didn't help. It made it worse, because he became very jealous.
Did they speak to him?
He was, the first 3 years, I called them numerous times, and they came to the house and they did some shepherding calls. No, they weren't much help, to be honest with you, you know. Be in subjection, you know, pray more together. Study, your study's important, family study. It's all the usual stuff.
I think it sounds shocking to people, because they're like, well, you know, surely that's not the answer. But we know that that's what the religion, the Jehovah's Witness religion, actually has put in print about situations when women are in a bad marriage or a bad situation. We know that they've said it in talks, they've put it in print. Pray more, go on the ministry more. In fact, they've said that a lot about depression or about whatever. Go in the ministry more, go in the ministry more. But you're saying basically that they didn't do anything. They told you to pray more, they told you to go in the ministry more, which you did, and none of that worked.
No. Also, I went into counselling, which was a big no-no at that time, you know. They don't want you going to worldly counsellors. So when they found out that I went to a worldly counsellor, I was spoken to by 2 elders that I shouldn't be going. So that put the end to that. That was the end of that.
Did they get you in the back room one meeting or something like that? How did they tell you?
How did they tell me? It was Tom. It was a meeting at the hall. Yeah. Yeah.
So basically, 2 of them say to you,
you shouldn't really be going to worldly counsellors. No.
So what? Were they suggesting go to any counsellor, like a Jehovah's Witness counsellor, or are they basically saying no counsellor?
No counsellor. No counsellor. As far as they were concerned, all I needed was the counsel from the Bible, and that's what they gave me.
But meanwhile, when you're at home, basically you're under the threat of physical violence and you're under the complete control of this person.
The mental violence, I think, was the worst.
Yeah.
Definitely the worst.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been out. I had a life before the truth, before the being a witness, and I had you know, different boyfriends. I said, but nothing came close to how nasty this man was. Nothing.
Do you think he believed the Jehovah's Witness stuff?
I think he did to a point. But then his true personality would take over. And he would use the scriptures against me. You know,
like what? What scriptures? Do you think of any that you used?
Well, I wouldn't let him come near me. I wouldn't let him touch me because of all the violence. And he used to say to me, well, I've got a right to my conjugal rights. You've got to give it to me because we're married. You're my wife. And I used to say, no, not while you're calling me names. Not while you're calling me a fat cow every day. I'm not doing it. And that stood for me till the day I left.
So how did you come to the point where you were, like, you know, getting strong enough to leave?
Well, the thing is, there was one point where a relative did manage to help me to get out with my daughter. This relative had his own business. He was doing housing refurbs. He knew a lot of landlords in Liverpool. So he got me a cheap flat. Me and my daughter moved into this flat. It was sparse. It wasn't very nice, but it was a start. You know, she loved her new school until I got a phone call off the elders at the old hall that I had to go back. I was still married. I was under threat of disfellowshipping if I didn't go and sort it out, which at that time I still believed in it, and disfellowshipping, the state I was in, I would never have coped with it. So I panicked and we went back. And then further down the line, I'd say about 7 or 8 months down the line, I couldn't take any more because he was threatening to kill me. And my daughter was refusing to go to school in case anything happened to me. And, you know, that was really hurt. So that was the last straw for me. That was the last straw. And I called the domestic violence unit in Warrington. And, yeah, the women, the police women were very, very good. They helped me to find somewhere to live. Took me to see a house. At that time, I did have a couple of jobs, part-time. I was able to save for a deposit without him realising. Yeah, and we got out. We got out. But unfortunately, 3 weeks after we left, he found us. So that's another story. In the meantime, he was disfellowshipped.
Right.
In the end, he was disfellowshipped just before I left the first time. And instead of it making him sit up and take notice, it made him worse because there was no control from the elders. It's actually made it worse.
Why did they disfellowship him?
All the arguments, the aggression. I think they'd just heard enough. They'd heard enough, like, you know, and the neighbours had said something to some of the witnesses knocking on the doors that they could hear the shouting all the time. So I think it was extreme. They were pushed to do it in the end.
Because it had finally, like, come to the point where they'd seen what he was doing.
Yeah, they just couldn't do it anymore. Yeah, they just couldn't make excuses anymore. Because the neighbours could hear all the rowing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they were starting to complain.
So you managed to get away from him?
The second time, yeah. This is how we ended up here at Newton-le-Willows. He found us after 3 weeks and made our lives a misery. And then he decided to come back to the meetings with a girlfriend who had been a friend of mine. So I kind of wore that, you know, put up with it, went to the meetings, told to put up with it, be humble, all the usual rubbish that you get. So I dealt with that for a while, and then he stopped coming, which made it easier for me. But in the meantime, the last straw that made me leave that house and come up here to Newton-le-Willows was I had a visit. The elders asked to speak to me in the back room after about 4 years after he'd left, after he was disfellowshipped. And they informed me that he wanted to come back to the meetings. He wanted to sit in the back to get reinstated. But they wanted him at this hall with us again because they needed to see his works, to see that he meant that he was truly repentant and ready for being reinstated. So for me, that was the last straw. Me and my daughter had tried to get over this, and all of a sudden these elders were bringing him back and insisting he was at our meetings again. So what happened then? The vodka came out. The heavy drinking really took off. Really took off. And at this point, the elders realised the extent of the damage. Because they actually, 3 of them did call to my house on different occasions and refused to punish me. Didn't bring the Bible out, said they didn't want to bring the Bible out. And one actually said, he's a lovely man, Brian. Brian actually said, I think we're responsible for getting to the state that you're in now. And I said, yeah. I said, you are. And then soon after, I found somewhere else to live in Newton-le-Willows, where they wouldn't find us, where the ex wouldn't find us, a new congregation. And I had another visit saying they didn't want us to leave. The elders didn't want us to leave the congregation. They wanted us to stay. But it was impossible. He was still there. Instead of asking him to leave, they wouldn't do it. So I left. We left. There was no choice. I was well and truly so traumatised by now that there's nothing else. Leaving was the only option.
And did you at this point still believe the Jehovah's Witness teachings and everything?
I was so angry and so traumatised that I couldn't understand how we could let this happen to us. I didn't realise then that, it was a satanic cult. That I just didn't realise at that time. I was just so perplexed and angry. I couldn't understand why it was happening. For a loving God,
Yeah, because I can see that, because you joined with all of that, hope. You joined with all of those promises. You went in and they were all so loving. And then this guy, he's joined, he's baptised. You're thinking, well, this is all going to be fine. You're going to think that. And he was really nice to you at the beginning. Everything was so great at the beginning. But then the way that the elders advised you and advised you badly, that is it's not, people could say, well, hang on, it's just a bit of bad luck. That guy turned out to be horrible. Is that really anything to do with the cult? What part do you think the Jehovah's Witnesses played in that situation? I mean...
Oh, their refusal. Their refusal to do anything in the first 2 or 3 years was definitely perplexing. Yeah, I just couldn't understand how we got away with it for so long. In fact, I was publicly reproved for arguing with him, for arguing back, for standing up for myself.
Right.
They reproved him publicly, but they reproved me as well. And now actually...
Had that been witnessed by people? Is that why? Had people seen or heard you arguing?
The neighbours had, and they'd been reporting it to, obviously, people knocking on the door. They were mentioning it, and the elders, it did get back to one of the elders, and he did speak to me. And there was one sister at the time, when things were particularly bad, I rang her up and said, I've got to get out of here, I can't cope. He'd locked me in, so I had to climb out the window. She took me away with my daughter, took me to another friend's house. And that became public knowledge because he followed us down there and created havoc.
Right. So basically, the elders don't want that to be something that people see. They're trying to make everything seem good in the congregation, that it's good to be a Jehovah's Witness. So if somebody's having physical violence and big massive arguments like that, and you're having to climb out of a window and all of that, they don't want that. They want to stop anyone seeing that, don't they, really?
Well, the sister that I called that came to pick me up from the house, me and my daughter, when we had to climb out the window, it actually stumbled her and she left because she couldn't believe I'd been publicly reproved when I'd done the right thing in calling for help and removed myself from the situation.
Yeah.
And they did what they did. She argued with them and she walked away.
Do you think that's because your husband then was telling them all sorts, like making it seem as though it was your fault?
To be honest with you, he hadn't said much. In front of the elders, he was like this different person. You know, like he'd seemed like he was humble, and he'd blush a lot and not know what to say, and completely different again. There were so many sides that if it was just ridiculous. Yeah.
Sounds awful. So what about afterwards? So you've left him and you sort of still believe it, but you're thinking, well, that I've been treated badly here and they're part of why all this has happened.
The PO in the old in the old hall was actually one of the main. He was very abusive to me from day one. He used to say some terrible things to me, put me down in such awful ways. And
give us an example.
Well, let's put it this way. When I separated for the second time, I was separated, I wasn't divorced. And another elder who was single was in pursuit of me.
Right.
He had a reputation for being a womanizer. He was well known, Jack the lad, very wealthy. But he was in pursuit of me. And I couldn't cope with it. I could not deal with it. The stress was ridiculous. A sister actually sat with me at the hall because I wouldn't go in because he was there. And in the end, I spoke to the presiding overseer. Said, look, I can't cope with this. This man is doing this, this and this, and he's pursuing me. And he said to me, oh, I don't think so. Why would he be coming after you? You're older, you're getting divorced, you're a single mum. Why would he be interested in you when he's got lots of young sisters throwing themselves at him?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then I went to a second elder and he said more or less the same thing.
So he just basically didn't believe a word you said?
No, put me down big time. That I wasn't good enough, he'd never come after me.
Goodness.
I actually confronted this elder that was pursuing me in the end. I rang him. And I said, well, what is it? I said, what do you want to do? And he said, nothing. It was all a game.
Right.
It was all a game. Because he was such a womanizer, he thought he could...
I know what you mean, because just because they thought he had other people throwing themselves at him, it wouldn't change anything, would it?
No.
Doesn't mean he's not,
no,
coming to you or saying anything to you.
No. Oh, it was horrendous.
Yeah.
I mean, it even got to the point where this brother that was chasing me, we were at a meeting, and I got out into the foyer with my daughter, and there was like a double door into the library at the back. One of those double doors was shut, the other one was open, and he wedged me in the door with his body, and I couldn't move.
Oh.
And I was panicking, and he was grinning. And a sister, one of his relatives, older sister, came out and said, hey, what do you think you're doing? Get off her. And that's when he stopped.
It's the stuff that goes on is unbelievable.
Oh, no,
I was going to ask you that, actually. I was going to ask you, like, were you aware of, when you were in the witnesses, were you aware of any child abuse situations?
Loads.
Really?
Loads, yeah. My daughter married an eldest son, but my friend that had come into the truth with me that I mentioned earlier on, she moved to Wigan, and I stayed in Warrington, obviously, and I used to visit her. And in that congregation there were 4 paedophiles.
Wow.
That we knew of, that we'd learnt of. Yeah.
So are these people who are alleged paedophiles, or are they people who have had a conviction? Have any of them had a conviction since, or are they like people who've not had any convictions?
They've not had any convictions. One of them moved away and they don't know where he is. Took his kids with him. Another one was a paedophile who'd abused his niece, and she was in that congregation. She had her own children at that time. They reinstated him and brought him into that congregation where she was. So that was a bit of a mess. My friend that came into the truth, she was disfellowshipped for having an affair with another man who'd been took off as an elder, and the reason he'd been taken off as an elder was because he committed incest with his daughter. I warned my friend. I told her what he'd done, and she didn't believe me. She married him.
Oh.
But he had been, when it all came out with him, he was an elder at the time. They removed him as an elder. But the daughter wouldn't press charges. She, as we know, the blackmail and the guilt, and it's complicated, isn't it? So it was left at him just being removed, but none of the others were reported. No. In fact, when I left the witnesses finally 6 years ago, it was then that I found out about a paedophile in my old congregation who'd since died, that he had sexually assaulted 4 young girls. And I knew nothing of it. Whilst this PO was putting me down and saying these awful things to me, they were shielding a really bad paedophile. And that's something that still bothers me, that these men are so self-righteous, that they can put somebody like me down, but cover over for a prolific paedophile.
So that's 4 in one congregation.
Well, my daughter married this elder's son, who's in that congregation. So that's where I learned a bit more,
And I've got to say, because I know we've chatted before and about all of this, and it's shocking to me, right? And I know it's shocking to everybody about the problem of child abuse in Jehovah's Witnesses, right? Everybody's shocked.
Yeah.
We know the statistics from the Australia Royal Commission.
Oh, yeah.
We know all of that, right? But when it's in your local area, right? So I went. People will know that I went to a memorial a few years back, and I recorded it. I videoed it, and I took the emblems, and I went to one of the Kingdom Halls local to me in this area. And I didn't say it on the video, but I turned to the side of me and I saw 2 paedophiles at that memorial, right? One of them, a convicted sex offender. The other one, I absolutely know he did it, even though he's still not convicted.
Yeah.
I know for 100%, because the reason I know is because he did it to my best friend who was in the religion. But basically, the convicted one, and then this other one, but the other one is the father of somebody I knew very well, and I know, and that person, can I say as well, that person who did that to somebody I know very well, that person said that they had been, the victim said to me that they had been passed around to multiple men. Right, now, that's in the local area, that's one congregation near, and then I know of the ones that have occurred in like some of the Manchester way congregations, which are not that far away from here as well. And I just think to myself, hang on a minute, this is far too many. You can't just say, oh, well, there's paedophiles everywhere, right? Because there are paedophiles everywhere. There are paedophiles who go into churches, ordinary churches. But I'll tell you something, you walk into an ordinary church and you say, nowadays especially, you walk into an ordinary church and you say, right, show me your child safeguarding policy. And they'll have it right there. They'll have it straight away. They've got a folder right there. All the people who deal with children are DBS checked. All of the leaders are DBS checked. Nobody goes near children unless they're DBS checked. In Jehovah's Witnesses, what's the problem? Why can't they just check them? DBS check them? And it makes me think, is it because half the elders well, not half of them, but who could have a criminal record?
Yeah. Well, I think if you remember back to them scrapping the Theocratic Ministry School,
Yeah.
that was over the time of the Royal Australian Commission. And they were dealing with children in the Theocratic Ministry School.
Oh, calling it a school. Yeah.
So they scrapped the school because somebody from Bethel had leaked, that the reason it had been scrapped is because they didn't want the elders having DBS checks. They didn't want to be checked.
But if you're going to say that, who said that?
It was somebody from Bethel.
Right, so they don't want to have DBS checks, which tells me it isn't about money.
No, of course.
Because actually, a lot of times when somebody volunteers for something, the person themselves pays for the DBS check.
That's right.
It's not as though the organisation has to pay for the DBS checks, really.
Yeah.
They could say, right, if you want to be an elder, you pay for your own DBS check.
It's so prolific, the child abuse, that they did not want these checks, so they scrapped the ministry school. Mm. Because at that time...
Because it's called a school as well, and that's where they're going to have, what you're teaching children.
Well, they were, yeah.
That is another thing that really winds me up, actually, about the child abuse issue, is to say, oh no, we don't have like Sunday schools, and we don't have things where children are alone.
Mm-mm.
It's such a lie. I was 12 when I joined the Witnesses, and the number of times I must have been on my own with a man, like either in a car going to the ministry, or at other times in a room with elders on your own.
Well, the thing is as well that this paedophile in my old congregation, he was allowed out with children on his own on the ministry. I even visited his house with his wife and his son. You know, with my daughter, I had no clue. And what really bothered me at the end was that I had worked with this man on the ministry.
Yeah.
And I had no idea he was a prolific paedophile. And me coming from my background, and knowing the girl, I know a couple of the girls that he'd abused. One, they were my daughter's age. And I couldn't understand why one of them had suddenly disappeared off the face of the earth. She was only 17. And I couldn't figure out where she'd gone. It was an elder's daughter. And, you know, on asking where she was, she didn't want it anymore. She'd left, you know. To find out that she'd been abused and put outside the congregation because she spoke about it was horrific to me. And I'd worked with that man on the ministry.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, though, I'm glad he didn't work with my daughter, because I'm not like them. If I'd have found out he'd have done anything to my daughter, I don't know what I'd have done. But he wouldn't have got away with it.
It's scary. And it's scary that they still won't change the policy, and they still won't do criminal record checks. They still won't change the two-witness rule. I think that's what does my head in about it.
I actually spoke to a sister about a year ago after I'd left. I spoke to an older sister, and even she said, I don't know about this two-people rule. She said, of course somebody's not going to abuse somebody while there's somebody else in the room. So even she... Now, she's very hard-headed, this lady. They don't get it, but they go along with it.
That's another thing, actually. I've never said this before, actually, either on my YouTube channel, but I'll say it now, is that somebody who I know closely as well, who lives in North Wales, they basically, an elder in their congregation, was sort of a newly appointed elder, but put in charge of the children in the congregation, put in charge of the youth, told, you're to look after the youth. He was about, I don't know how old he was, 45 maybe, something like that. You're in charge of the youth. Now this guy, no criminal record check, no training, no nothing. And he was found by police having sex with a 15-year-old, right? And he was convicted of it, right? And I know that as well for a certainty. Now, what shocks me about that is not only the fact that he did it, of course, but the fact that they just choose somebody and go, oh, you're in charge of the youth. And apparently the girl was a vulnerable girl, somebody with various problems, you know. And I just feel like there's, even just my limited knowledge, I don't have people in my family who I can say, oh yeah, that's an elder and they're going to tell me things. So it's not as though I'm getting told things. Basically, that's my limited knowledge. And like, in a way, your limited knowledge. But the number of paedophiles that we know between us in this local area is unbelievable. And in this general part of the world.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And we know about the Manchester, the scandal at the New Moston and all of that went on.
Yeah, yeah. And
I do know people involved in that. And how the congregation still defended the paedophile as though he was innocent. I hear he's out now and back, I think. I think he's going back to meetings. But the point is, it's just unprecedented scale, and I think that's why they won't release that database.
No, I know there've been numerous, I mean, there's been so many attempts to get that database released. But, I mean, we know from the Australian Rail Commission that they released their database and there's 1,006 paedophiles on it.
Yeah.
Not reported to the police from the 1950s onwards. So if there's that many in Australia, can you imagine the size of America?
Yeah.
How many there are there?
And we're talking about what we personally have witnessed in Britain.
Yeah, this is just here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're sort of northwest of England, UK, in case anybody's wondering where we're from.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, we're just talking about this small corner of the north.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
A very small corner of the north. We're talking 25 miles. Liverpool, 25 miles, Manchester.
Yeah, yeah. So let's get back to your story then. What happened to help you start to wake up from the JWs?
I think because of my treatment, obviously you've got dissonance.
Yeah. So
every time I had a doubt, I shut down. It shut down. We all know it's a physiological thing now, dissonance. A part of your brain shuts down physically. Right. So it's not as simple as it seems. I think for me, it wasn't just knowing about the paedophiles. I didn't know about the bigger scope of paedophiles. I knew the smaller scope. I hadn't learnt about my own congregation at this point, but I knew it was a problem. So that niggled me. That bothered me. The treatment of the elders, the cruelty from the elders. Lack of love. You know, they talk about love amongst us. No. It's the loneliest, most isolated I've been in my whole life. And I've lived in some terrible places. There was an incident, I think I went to this new congregation in Newton with gritted teeth, thinking I needed to try and get on top of everything. You know, I needed to get some belief back. The elders were good to me. They understood what I'd been through with the other elders and they were sympathetic. So that did help. And at first, you know, the sisters do try and take you under the wing, and it was a different scenario, different atmosphere. And then further along, I had an unfortunate incident where I was in St Helens Town Centre and I witnessed a woman jumping off a multi-storey car park. I went over to help her. She wasn't deceased straight away. Stayed there till the ambulance came, the police came. Then I left and went home. CIG came to see me. They wanted a statement. But what got to me more than anything was that it got round the congregation what I'd seen, what had happened. And I never got one phone call. Never got anybody asking me how I was. Not one elder approached me. There was nothing. And that hurt me more than anything. And then I had to sit there and listen to these talks about love amongst us in the congregations. I just wanted to scream because I knew it wasn't true. And I think from then on, it was a slow decline. It wasn't a fast decline because you're all mixed up. You know, all this dissonance, you're arguing with yourself. You know you could lose your daughter. You know you're going to lose your friends. So you stay under fear. But in the end, it got too much. It got too much in the end. I mean, I was numb. And I knew that I was suicidal. And I knew that if I stayed, I wasn't going to last. I was either going to drink myself to death or do something stupid. So, on pain of losing my daughter, I thought, I've got to get out. So I slowly, because my health had been bad anyway, I wasn't consistent at the meetings. And I certainly wasn't consistent on the ministry. So it was a bit easier, I think, than most who suddenly stopped going. I eased out. But over time, obviously, over 2 or 3 years, it was apparent to my daughter that I'd lost the faith. Yeah. Didn't believe it anymore.
So your daughter, she'd got baptised, had she, in the religion?
She got baptised when she was, I think, 20, 21, something like that.
Right.
She was older. So she wasn't too fussed when I stopped going altogether because it was a gradual... She knew how ill I was, so it was no big deal. But I think once she realised that I no longer believed, that I couldn't keep it to myself. I mean, she got married at this point as well, so that meant she was away. I saw her regularly, but obviously there wasn't so much going on that she could see. And then, of course, there was that big Candice Conti case. Came out. 32 million she was awarded. I mentioned it to my son-in-law about this Candice and the young man that came out at the same time. I think he got a similar award.
Right.
I mentioned it to my son-in-law, whose father was an elder. And to my surprise, his father knew, this elder knew about it, and he was so perplexed. He says, I don't know what they're going to do about it. So he knew. He'd either been online or others had been online. And he wasn't shocked. But things just deteriorated from there. And I think once I started researching, I went online. I was looking for something else to do with a study at the hall. And I ended up on something else that was talking about the Roman Catholics. And in this Roman Catholic news, their news letter that they print online, was a mention of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And I'm like, oh, okay. I dug further in, and then I came across, what was his name at the time? John Cedars. Found his videos, because I started digging, and it was, whoa, this is... And it was like the sun came out. It's all a lie. It's not true. It's not the truth.
Yeah.
It's all a lie. I'm free. And the sun's coming out, the birds are singing. It was such a wonderful, joyous feeling that I didn't care about anything else at that point. I was going to lose my daughter and everything, but at that point, I was so relieved that it wasn't an issue for me. Not until much later on.
So did you feel as though... What did you think about the years that you'd been involved? How many years were you involved altogether?
30 years.
Wow.
30 years. Do I regret it? I regret losing my daughter.
Yeah.
But would I have looked at the Bible if they hadn't have knocked? They taught me a lot about the Bible, and I got to know Jesus. there was that side of it that I am grateful for, because I have a massive belief in Jesus. I knew he existed, but not the way that they were teaching it.
Right.
And I knew there was a God, you know, and he's answered me many times since I've left. But without them knocking on the door, I would doubt that I would have opened a Bible. So that did come out of it.
Yeah.
It's $1 million question. Was it worth it? It's hard to say. I'm ambivalent. I'm grateful that I know God. And I'm angry that I lost my daughter. And I'm angry that so many people are lied to.
Yeah.
And the families that have been smashed are broken apart. How do you quantify it? I can't quantify it.
No. Tell us what happened with your daughter, because you'd left, you'd faded away, but then you're coming out with stuff like Candice Conti. And what actually kind of caused the final thing that happened with her?
That was it. It was when I went online and saw this thing in the Roman Catholic news, of all things, about the Jehovah's Witnesses, because all their sex abuse had come out at that time.
Yeah.
And the Pope, one of their popes that had reigned for a very short time, I'm going back about 20 odd years ago, I can't remember his name. He had been speaking to his niece, who was a Jehovah's Witness.
Oh.
And they'd been discussing the Bible, and then he left. He was no Pope no more.
Wow.
And I don't know if it was to do with it, but there was a lot of things in there that Catholic, you know, that the newspapers and that intrigued me. And that made me look at more, you know, like I came across John Cedars, and of course, you know, you're so brainwashed that it took me a while to get onto John Cedars, you know, to press the button.
Yeah.
Because I thought, you know, Job's going to kill me if I do this.
Yeah.
That was my thinking, the fear. And in the end, I went, oh, to hell with it. And I pressed it, and the things I was hearing was just wow.
But then you came out with that, and you were talking about it to, like, say, your son-in-law or whatever. Is that what happened?
I wasn't talking about that, no. I don't know how it came about, but I mentioned the child abuse because it was obviously news. It was in the news, so it was newsworthy. So I said to him, because, right, you know my friend that married that paedophile? He's a relation of my son-in-law.
Right, okay.
It's in a way, they are related to that family. He's related to that family. So that's how things were coming about paedophiles, with, you know, like we were talking about. And
clear this bit. You're not disfellowshipped.
No.
Right.
I didn't I've not disassociated. It's like I say, I drifted away.
That makes two of us then. So we're both sat here. We're not disassociated. We're not disfellowshipped.
Yeah.
And we're talking about all this.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Go on.
Well, the thing is, I used to meet my daughter in Wigan every Friday. After all this had happened and I'd walked away, this was about 2 years in. Things were going okay, and I thought, oh, this is all right, this. I've left the truth. I've still got my daughter. I'm doing okay. Yeah. And I used to meet her every Friday in Wigan for lunch. Bought her some nice little presents. You know, I used to like buying her stuff. Every Friday, she used to look forward to it. I loved it. Look forward to my Fridays. They used to take me to the caravan twice a year, the pair of them. It was a lovely treat, you know. I absolutely loved it because it's in Wales, where I come from, and I felt like going home. Loved it. And I can remember thinking to myself, oh, if they ever took this away from me, I don't know what I'd do. Well, Satan must have heard me because the Friday suddenly stopped, the Friday lunch. I rang her up to make arrangements, and she said, oh, I'm not meeting you this Friday. And I said, oh, okay, why? She said, well, because I'm going to the cinema with... Now, I know this friend. Her husband's just been made a ministerial servant. And after talking to... she suddenly stopped seeing me. So I knew that she's the wrong person to talk to because she hates her own mother. Her own mother is not a witness, never has been a witness, but she's got nothing good, despite us knowing we don't know this woman. So I thought, she's been talking to... we're going to do the Watchtower dance now. You know, if you don't come back, if you don't do this, do that, I can't see you on a Friday. So that was how it started. The next thing was my trips to the caravan. It went from 4 or 5 nights every 6 months to 2 nights once a year. The atmospheres were unbearable when I was there. So that stopped. And that was it, basically. You know, but she still expected me to go to her house, you know, run all the way there. 3 buses to her where she lived. 3 there, 3 back. Cost me a fortune. Whereas in the past, she'd meet me and then maybe drop me home. That stopped.
So why did she need you to go to her house? Was it because her husband was there and things like that? What
I was taught is if somebody's leaving the truth, you don't go running to them. You know, you don't go to them, you don't go to the house, you don't invite them out. They have to come to you, to your home.
Right.
And I thought, I'm not doing it. I thought, I am not doing it because in between all the caravan, going to the caravan and all these things, stopping to see me on a Friday, the nastiness, I just didn't know her anymore. I did not recognise my own loving daughter anymore. She'd gone. It was just so sad. You know, she was sad because I'd left. And I know how she felt because when she was disfellowshipped after this affair, I know how she felt because I was so angry because she hadn't just left Jehovah. She'd left me.
Yeah.
And my daughter must have felt it tenfold. So the damage that this cult does, it can't be put into words.
Because I think the crux of it is that the cult, even if somebody's not disfellowshipped, it makes that relationship so difficult, so hard to maintain. I have been shunned by a lot of people. When I first left the witnesses, I was not disfellowshipped, I'm not now, but people will still walk across the other side of the street away from me. I've got family members who would rather not have contact with me. Now, they'll say hello if they happen to see me, but that's it. They don't want any more contact. So it's because, basically, they know that you've left and that you don't agree with it anymore. And it just makes the relationship impossible. And then if you happen to say anything, then they're going to think in their mind, right, well, this person's dangerous. They're going to say something that's going to affect my faith. So then you've got another big rift between you because they feel like you're dangerous, but you're just talking about things that are actually true and factual.
Yeah.
You're not still in the indoctrination.
Yeah.
But they are.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very deep. It took me to leave and dig around and look at what was going on for me to realise how deep the indoctrination is. And it's shocking to me. Shocking to me how clever they've been. The psychological, all of it is just beyond normal people comprehension. But the psychology behind it is off this planet.
I agree, actually. I think people think or say that even Cedars has said, Lloyd Evans has said, that he think, they're deceived. This governing body, they're deceived. They're just as clueless as anybody else. I actually
No.
don't agree with that at all.
I think they're all awake. I think they all know.
They know. I think they know. And the reason I think they know is because the evidence is there.
Oh, yeah.
In the publications and in the talks they do.
Yeah.
What they do all the time is they do strategic talks. They're planning.
Yeah.
They're planning. They're doing damage control. They're doing
a manipulation.
Yeah. So, like a few years ago, not long ago, they were saying, oh, you know, soon they're going to start accusing even the leaders of God's organisation. Well, because they knew
it was going on,
that there was going to be some accusations against people at the top. So they were trying to say it first.
Well, they're being monitored, aren't we, on Facebook? We're being monitored all over.
Yeah.
Everybody's monitored.
Yeah.
So they know exactly what's being said, and they plan ahead.
And I've noticed that as well. Because obviously my channel is Christian, right? Yeah. I have got kind of like a lot of knowledge about the Christian channels and the Christian people who are speaking out against Jehovah's Witnesses, right? So if somebody comes out with a particular argument, like a really good biblical argument, right? Now, one of them, which is an example, is somebody came out with... what about the judgment of the dead, right? They came out with, what about this judgment of the dead? They're wrong about it. They are wrong about it because this is what the scripture says, to do with, they were saying that people were only judged after Armageddon and all this stuff, right? So when a Christian came out with that, and I know things I've said on my channel as well, it's usually about a year it takes them, because I think they take a long time to respond. Next minute, they're doing a talk. Oh, we've had new light on John 5:28 and 29. But I think the new light was because they're constantly reviewing what arguments people have got against the religion. And they're like, right, how can we, counter-argument that?
Preempt it, yeah.
Yeah, how can we answer it?
Yeah.
So then they try and answer it, but of course it doesn't fit or fit in with Bible, and they're constantly trying to do damage control. Even their explanation of that scripture actually was just completely random. I mean, it didn't make any sense.
No.
They still didn't have a coherent thing to say about it. But I find that, like even I've just done a talk and put it on my YouTube about the resurrection of Jesus, and I've made a very, very strong point about how they ignore the resurrection and how they don't understand it. Now, I'm not blowing my own trumpet here. I'm not, honestly. When I say I would not be surprised if in 6 months to a year they start talking about the resurrection and they bring out a Watchtower all about it.
Yeah.
Because it's as though when somebody comes up with something that really hurts them, they go, we need to answer that.
Yeah.
We need a Watchtower on that.
Oh, yeah, I know there are people watching. I know that they're sifting through all... They've probably got a team doing it.
Oh, yeah.
They'll have a team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I got the feeling when I spoke to... there was a man I spoke to who was a Jehovah's Witness elder, and I put all the recordings on my channel. And he was in America, and he said he'd been associated with the governing body, and he'd been a translator for the governing body. And he was, like, very elderly. And he'd been an elder for 50 years or something. And one thing I just got a feeling of when I spoke to him was that it was almost like he was getting my view on everything. He was asking me questions about everything. He wanted to know, well, what's your biblical view on this? What's your view on this? What's your view on this? And it was...
Picking your brains.
Yeah, so I thought, hang on a minute. Is he just information gathering here or what? Like figuring out what we believe. What do people believe, and how do we argue against the witnesses?
Yeah.
Because he never answered anything. He didn't answer anything scripturally.
No.
All he did basically was criticise the churches. So his position was, well, we're the best church and all them other churches are rubbish. That was basically his only argument.
Well, they're moving on, aren't they? I mean, they're coming off now. No more ministry. Stuff like that. And they're moving more mainstream online now. I don't think it's going to be long before we see an end of Watchtower. I don't know about jw.org, but Watchtower definitely. Definitely.
Because, well, I don't know, because I think as long as they're still making money, as long as they're still they've got people as members.
They're just trying to keep now the ones that they've got, because they're not going to bring any more in.
One thing they do is they copy the Mormons. I've noticed that as well, because the Mormons had Mormon broadcasting 10 years before, something like that, before JW broadcasting. And now the Mormons are actually trying to look more mainstream. And I think the Jehovah's Witnesses, if they're going to survive, they have to start looking as though they're normal Christians. They have to start looking more mainstream.
Well, they've brought out the new brochure about being Christians, haven't they?
Have they?
The new, that surprise one that was in the box that they weren't supposed to open.
Oh.
It's True Christians. It's got Christians on the front.
Oh, I need to look at that. I've not seen it.
Yeah.
I've not seen it. I'll have a look.
Yeah.
But I just want to say about your daughter, because I think it's important for people to know, that I'm aware that you've been in hospital, you've had operations. You now...
I nearly lost my eyesight, yeah.
If you don't... Well, I don't know if you mind mentioning your age, but you're getting older.
I'm 102. And I look really well. Don't I look well?
You do, actually. You look great.
Look, 102.
So, yeah, you've had operations. You've gone in hospital. You've had all sorts going on.
I've had 2 broken feet.
Yeah, and you've had no help from your daughter. You've had no contact from your daughter. There's zero contact between you. And I tried to help, and I spoke to your son-in-law, and I actually said, look, Lesley has had operations, has had all sorts going on, and I think that you don't have to have, I actually said to him, you don't have to have lots and lots of contact all the time, but what about just kind of basic, maybe even once a month? And I said to him, what about if she says, well, look, we'll not speak about the Jehovah's Witnesses? And I remember asking you, and you said, yeah, I'll just not speak about it if she wants.
I had stopped, actually. I never met... That last 2 or 3 years, when things were going well, never mentioned it once.
Yeah. So I said all this to him, and I said, so all I'm asking, because I said, I'm a Christian. I mean, he didn't know who I was.
Yeah.
I said, I'm a Christian, and I just think, there could be some contact, even if it's not dead close or whatever. What do you think? Oh, well, we'll get back to you. Basically, they've never got back to me or you.
No.
And I just feel like there's a scripture that says the ones who abandon their own household are worse than a person without faith.
Yeah.
And it is so sad. It is just so sad that... And I know that people could say, well, oh, there's different... Other people in families cut people off and all that. They do. Well, they do, right? But the trouble is with this religion, it teaches that. It encourages that. It tells them, if somebody's talking, disagreeing and things, well, they're an apostate. You've got to avoid them. I mean, I think he used that word, apostate.
Yeah.
Apostate talk and all that. So... they label somebody an apostate whether they're disfellowshipped or not.
Problem is they're the true apostates and they don't know it.
Yeah. So actually that brings us to your beliefs now, because I just want to, we've been talking for ages, so I just want to finish on talking about like what you believe, about Jesus and about like your faith right now. Like, what's your faith? You
I love it. I love
consider
Jesus.
yourself a Christian, obviously.
Yeah. I love Jesus. Obviously, Jesus. I haven't quite figured out the Trinity. I must admit, the Trinity and it all confuses me, and but for me, I don't think that's as important as loving Jesus. Who or what, he's just is. You know what I mean? For me. We've spoken, haven't we, about what he's done for me since I've left, even though I've lost my daughter. I mean, I've had things happen to me that have just been mind-bending. And one of them actually happened in public. And I think it mind-bends everybody. And I still think about it now, but I think you've got to keep you've got to keep knowing him. You've got to keep getting to know him. You've got to keep remembering that he's there. And I don't think it takes much. Once she's in your life, it's like you're talking about next door neighbour. You know they're there.
Yeah.
You don't have to be full on all the time. You just know in your heart he's there, and you know you've got your relationship, and that's all that matters. You know, I couldn't let it. I'd never be able to let him go now. Never. It'd be impossible. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I know a lot of witnesses leave, and they're in a different position to me. If you've been brought up, born in, I think you're on a completely different trajectory.
Yeah.
Because so many of them have been brought up so strictly, missed so many things in life that they didn't need to miss, gone through so much that they didn't have to gone through, and all the lies that they are strict atheists. They're completely atheistic now. You know, all the sitting on the fence. So, you know, it's different strokes, I think, for different folks.
I think it's an advantage for you that you were not a witness for that period of time, definitely.
Yeah. And I think, you know, all the lies and all the abuse and everything, in a way, my past, it wasn't such a shock, although it was horrendous. I think if I'd been born in and somebody was suddenly violent to me and I'd never experienced it, it would destroy you. Yeah. But I think it had hardened me to it, you know, so I was able to get out and it was a scramble, and it was hard, and it was frightening, but you know the way it goes, and you just got to do it, and you go to sleep and you wake up the next day, and it goes on until you find a place where you're comfortable. You know, don't expect to think straight for a long time. Yeah. Because it's going to go rumble on. You're not going to get a miracle.
So what's your life like now?
It's taken me a long time. I mean, I still get terrible depression. I've got chronic fatigue, which batters me at times. But it doesn't. As I've got older, I think I've mellowed to it. I think age and experience have got a lot to do with it as well. I think I've grown up. It took me 80 years, but I'm here. No, yeah. I think a kind of maturity's come with it. You know, there's a kind of a wisdom there now that it's a bit more knowing. Things don't bother me that used to bother me. If somebody doesn't like me, I think, tough. Your problem, not mine. And mean it. You know, and just bat it off. All those things that used to hurt me up until about 10, 12, 15 years ago, they don't bother me now. I think you move on, and I think priorities change as you get older. I'm determined to enjoy what I've got left. Yeah. You know, I want to go out laughing. You know, well, that was a right ride. That was a proper ride, you know. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely changes. Massively. Yeah, but it does come. I think it comes with age and getting, you know, growing up a bit, just growing.
So, we'll finish, but finally, what would you say to people who maybe they've left and maybe they feel as though the life's fell to pieces? What would you say, sort of a bit of advice about coming out of the witnesses?
There's no easy way. Definitely no easy way. You've got to sort out the mess in your mind first. You know, it's all going to be a mishmash of thoughts, feelings, fear. Where do I go from here? What happens at death was one with me. You know, because you thought you're going to live forever. They were sorting all that out. So my first port of call was the Bible, which a lot of people won't do, but I recommend it. That you start relearning. And, you know, relearn all the twisted scriptures that you've been taught. and to see that you can do it. You can do it, you know. Don't give yourself a time.
Mm-hmm.
Don't give yourself a time. Just take it as it comes, you know, because it's a lot to deal with, especially if you're going to lose a community. It's took me a long time. I'm 6 years in now, and I've just started volunteering at a youth club 6 weeks ago. I think I'm in hell. But it's a nice, you know, I love the kids. You know, and find whatever you thought you'd like to do as a witness and you couldn't, within reason, give it a go.
Yeah.
Give it a go.
And that's good advice as well.
Yeah, give it a go. You know, but like I say, 6 years, and I'm not a confident person. I still have anxiety. But when I look back to how I was 3 years ago, I would never have volunteered with children. It was something I wanted to do, but thought I could never do. And here I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look forward, yeah. Try not to look back too much. You will be angry. You'll feel bitter. You feel you've been kicked around. But you can build. You know, don't give up. Yeah, and that's it.
Awesome. Well, it's been awesome chatting. We've chatted for quite a long time, so we better stop now. And one thing I'll say just before I switch off the recording is just for people listening, if you are wondering about Bible topics, then listen to the other videos on this channel, because this channel has a videos playlist on Is Jesus God? I've got videos on all of the Jehovah's Witness teachings, more or less. And looking at what the Bible says compared to Jehovah's Witness teachings. And I'd just say to everybody, don't ditch God, because it wasn't God who caused all this. It's the cult that caused it, and the people who are running it, and basically people, human beings who've caused it. So look at God and don't ditch all belief, and maybe consider reading some of the Bible and thinking about Jesus. And that's what I'd say. But thank you, Lesley, for talking. I'm sure people will enjoy this, and make comment on the video as well, and leave comments about what you think about Lesley's story. All right?
All right, thank you, Dawn. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.